Hello and welcome to DSW's Endpoint Assessment for the Level 4 Financial Advisor Standard. My name is Isabel, I'm a product owner at DSW and I'll be talking you through this standard today. This recording is designed to give you an overview of what will happen during Endpoint Assessment, what to expect, when it will take place, but also how apprentices can prepare and what support is available. By the end of this, you should have a clear understanding of how the process will work and what the requirements are. And of course, if there are any questions or anything you need more information on, we'll show you where to go for additional support at the end of this recording. Today we'll be discussing what the endpoint assessment process looks like, how and when it will be delivered, what happens during the assessment itself, and we'll go into more detail about the Financial Advisor Standard, how each assessment method works, and how it will be graded. What is endpoint assessment? This is what we call the series of assessments an apprentice must take to prove they are able to do the job for which they've been training. These take place once the on-programme period is complete and the apprentice is deemed ready for endpoint assessment. Assessment design and delivery. DSW create assessment materials in line with robust design principles that are recognised by Ofqual. These principles are validity, reliability and comparability, manageability and minimising bias. This means you can be assured that our assessments are appropriate for the standard, that everyone will get the same experience, that the assessments will be consistent and fair, and that everyone will have a chance to succeed. When does endpoint assessment happen? Endpoint assessment begins when the on-programme phase has been completed, required functional skills have been achieved, the required professional qualification has been achieved, and the employer and apprenticeship training provider agree that the apprentice is competent. This next stage is called Gateway, and it's when the apprentice begins preparing for the endpoint assessment process. What happens during endpoint assessment? The apprentice completes the assessments detailed in the assessment plan. There is still an expectation that the apprenticeship training provider will support the apprentices throughout the endpoint assessment period. This is to ensure that they are familiar with what's to come, and so mock exams can be completed. In order to pass and be deemed competent, the apprentice must pass all of the assessments. This typically happens over a period of 5 months from the point they are approved for Gateway. Here we have an overview of the assessment methods used for the Financial Advisor Standard. It's made up of 2 components. We have a case study, which is a 90-minute test taken online using the question mark platform, and the Viva based on portfolio evidence, which lasts for 60 minutes. We'll look at each method in a bit more detail now. Case study. The case study test must be taken under controlled examination conditions and is completed online using question mark. Once the apprentice is approved for Gateway, they will be given access to a mock and a live schedule to book their test on question mark. The live test date must be agreed at the planning meeting prior to it being booked. A paper-based mock case study can be found in the toolkit. The case study will consist of a case file containing items such as records, notes from client meetings or discussions, fact finds and product research. During the assessment, apprentices will be asked to review the case file, identify any errors or omissions, identify any work that needs to be completed, and answer a series of written questions in the response boxes. The questions have been designed to ensure that the apprentice has the opportunity to evidence all of the 18 learning outcomes assigned to this assessment method. Apprentices may be tested on their knowledge and application of protection policies, pensions, savings and investments and inheritance tax, including case study analysis and associated tools such as cash flow modelling, risk profilers and product sourcing tools. In order to keep the case file a manageable size to review during the assessment time, some of the documentation or parts of documents have been removed. Where this is the case, the documentation has been annotated accordingly, and any personal information has been redacted. Apprentices will be given 90 minutes to review the case file and complete the case study. It's strongly recommended that the first 15 minutes are used for reading time to allow the apprentice to digest the case file prior to starting on their answers. Portfolio of evidence. Portfolio should be compiled from the best work gathered during the last 6 months of the on-programme period and up to 3 months into the endpoint assessment period. Evidence collected outside of this timeframe will not be accepted unless it is something that only happens rarely, such as an audit or yearly appraisal, and a rationale for providing this evidence must be provided. In the portfolio, we're looking for a blend of evidence, and it's really important that the apprentice puts in as much as they possibly can in terms of demonstrating their competence with their best pieces of evidence. This will allow us to explore that further and relate to specific pieces of evidence to discuss in the Viva. In their portfolio, they will need to demonstrate how they've applied the knowledge, skills and behaviour of the standard and should contain real work tasks that they have completed. You can either upload it to EPA Pro as a zip folder or provide us with a link to your ePortfolio platform. The portfolio must contain at least one piece of evidence mapped clearly to each learning outcome assigned to this assessment method. Although each piece of evidence may map to more than one learning outcome, this will typically result in 20 pieces of evidence. There is a portfolio referencing table in the toolkit which provides details of each learning outcome being assessed. They've been grouped into 11 areas based on the knowledge and skills areas in the standard, with the behaviours embedded where appropriate. Each area will be the focus of a question during the Viva. It may help apprentices to think about these areas when selecting evidence for their portfolio. More information on providing evidence can be found in the toolkit. The portfolio must contain a signed declaration from the employer and the apprenticeship training provider, confirming that this evidence provided is valid and attributable to the apprentice, and that they believe the apprentice has demonstrated competence against at least 28 of the learning outcomes. The portfolio will be submitted at least 2 weeks prior to the Viva taking place. The portfolio will be submitted to DSW on the date agreed at the planning meeting. The endpoint assessor will assess the portfolio of evidence and prepare questions for the Viva prior to it taking place. Feedback on the portfolio or the specific areas to be addressed in the Viva will not be provided prior to it taking place. Context statements. When we refer to a context statement, we want to know what the apprentice has done in a specific situation: who, what, where, why, when. Build a picture behind a specific situation and from there pull on pieces of product and performance evidence to demonstrate exactly what they've done in relation to the context statement. It's a great way for apprentices to bring all of their evidence together and give a more rounded picture of what they're capable of. They do need to make sure that they corroborate what they have said in their context statement with evidence, as it is purely anecdotal. Evidence types. The portfolio must include a minimum of at least one piece of evidence for each of the learning outcomes and will typically contain around 20 pieces of evidence. One piece of evidence could span several learning outcomes, so they could use one context statement and additional pieces of evidence to cover multiple learning outcomes. A piece of evidence might be a single document, or it may be a folder containing a number of documents which link together. There may also be some outcomes which require more than one piece of evidence to be mapped to them. As you can see, there is a wide range of evidence types, and the evidence you choose may be different to what appears in this list, which is absolutely fine as long as it's demonstrating those learning outcomes. Heavily redacted documents are preferred to excerpts, but both would be accepted. We do ask that videos and recordings are a maximum of 2 hours, and they need to be time-stamped in the referencing table. Viva. The learning outcomes can be met through the portfolio or the Viva. The assessor will mark the portfolio, identifying any outcomes that have been fully or partially met in the portfolio. During the Viva, 14 questions will be asked. One of these questions will be around the apprentice's progression and approach to work. 2 questions will be asked on Area 7 and Area 8, and 1 in each of the other areas. Where learning outcomes within an area have not yet been met, the question will focus on these. If all of the learning outcomes for an area have been met in the portfolio, the question will be used to confirm the apprentice's understanding of the evidence provided. Up to 1 follow-up prompt may be asked for each question, and some sample questions have been provided in the toolkit. The portfolio of evidence can be referred to by the apprentice and the assessor during the Viva, which will last for 60 minutes. Anything in excess will not be included in the assessment. It's strongly recommended that apprentices review the content of the portfolio prior to the Viva to make it easier for them to refer to during the assessment. The Viva will be held in an environment free from distraction via an online video conferencing platform such as WebEx or Zoom, as advised by the assessor. You may ask to use an alternative platform if necessary. It's strongly recommended that the platform is tested prior to the date of assessment to avoid technical problems and ensure familiarity with the platform. The apprentice cannot have anyone else in the room unless previously agreed through a specific requirement or reasonable adjustment. We do recommend the use of mock exams with the apprentice so they are aware of how the assessment will run in practice. As with any of our assessments, each of the live assess methods of the apprentice will need to come prepared with valid photo ID to show and present to the assessor. Grading. There are two graded assessment methods for this standard, the case study test and the viva. Each assessment method is graded as either a fail, pass or distinction as follows. In order to pass the case study test, the apprentice must meet the requirements for 12 learning outcomes, including the 5 mandatory learning outcomes assigned to this assessment method. To achieve distinction in the case study test, the apprentice must meet requirements for 14 of the learning outcomes, including the 5 mandatory learning outcomes assigned to this assessment method. To achieve a pass in the viva, the apprentice must meet the requirements for 28 learning outcomes assigned to this method. To achieve a distinction in the viva, the apprentice must meet the requirements for 34 or more learning outcomes assigned to this method. Both assessment methods must be individually passed, and the table shown on screen now will be used to calculate the overall score. Resits. Apprentices who fail one or more assessment method will be offered the opportunity to take a resit or retake. A resit does not require further learning, whereas a retake does. Apprentices should have a supportive action plan in place to prepare for a resit or retake. The apprentice's employer will need to agree that a resit or retake is an appropriate course of action. The operations team will be in contact on receipt of a fail grade notification to confirm if the apprentice would like to go ahead with a resit or retake. An apprentice who fails an assessment method will only be required to resit or retake the failed method. Following endpoint assessment, apprentices are entitled to appeal against assessment decisions. The apprenticeship appeals process cannot be used to obtain additional feedback or advice. The DSW appeals policy can be found on EPA Pro. Thank you for watching. We hope this has been helpful. As always, we are happy to help if you have any questions or need any more information, so please do get in touch. You can email us at info@dswapprenticeships.co.uk or give us a call on 01302 760 008. Thank you.